The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Pacific Ballroom did not so much light the room as they dripped illumination over the people within it, lacquering them in a honeyed, expensive glow. Here, power was not spoken, it was worn. It was in the precise cut of a tuxedo, the weight of a watch on a man's wrist, the practiced stillness of a wife's smile. And at the absolute gravitational center of this universe stood Chairman Han Jin-woo. He was not a large man, but his presence occupied space, bending the room's energy toward him. Beside him, his wife, Han Min-jun, was a masterpiece of curated elegance, a column of crimson silk whose posture was as immaculate as it was unbreachable. They were a portrait of untouchable authority. And then, the portrait shattered. It happened without a sound. Chairman Han was lifting a glass of champagne to his lips, a faint smile directed at a rival across the room, when his body simply lost its instruction. The smile vanished. The glass slipped from his fingers, falling to the plush carpet with a dull, muffled thud that was somehow louder than a scream. He did not cry out. He did not stumble. He folded. One moment, he was the axis of the world, and the next he was a heap of exquisitely tailored wool on the floor. For 3 full seconds, the world stopped. 100 of the city's most powerful figures, men and women who commanded markets and moved fortunes, were rendered utterly inert. They stared, their faces a gallery of calculated shock, their bodies locked in a state of social paralysis. To move first was to reveal your position, your ambition, your fear. And so, nobody moved. The music died. The waiters froze. The air thickened with the silent, frantic calculations of predators and prey assessing a sudden vacancy at the top of the food chain. Nobody moved, except one person. From the edge of the room, a figure in deep, elegant purple began to push through the forest of frozen bodies. She was a young woman, barely 23, her presence in this room an anomaly that many had noted but none had understood. She was not one of them. She was Chloe, and as she moved, her face was not a mask of shock or fear. It was a mask of intense, unadulterated focus. As she broke the invisible barrier and knelt beside the fallen chairman, another stillness was broken. From her throne of crimson silk, Han Min-jun's eyes, cold and sharp as obsidian chips, found the girl in the purple dress. And in that gaze, there was no concern for her husband. There was only a flare of pure, incandescent hatred, a promise of ruin so profound it was its own form of violence. The first great mystery of the night was not why the chairman had fallen. It was why his wife looked as though she wanted to murder the only person trying to save him. Chloe's movements were a study in fluid efficiency, a stark contrast to the rigid tableau surrounding her. The murmurs that had begun to ripple through the crowd died again as she placed 2 fingers on the side of Chairman Han's neck, her touch firm and diagnostic. Her other hand tilted his head back, clearing his airway with an instinct that was clearly not learned in a ballroom. The world of silks and whispers fell away, replaced by the stark, unforgiving reality of a human body failing. Han Min-jun was on her feet now, her red dress a slash of color moving toward the scene. Her grace was gone, replaced by a brittle, sharp-edged fury. "Get away from him," she commanded, her voice low and tight, meant only for Chloe. "Do not touch my husband." Chloe did not look up. Her focus was entirely on the man on the floor. Her thumb brushed over his lips, her brow furrowing slightly. "He's not breathing," she said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that silenced Min-jun for a bare second. And then she began. She placed the heel of one hand on the center of his chest, laced the fingers of the other over it, and pushed. The first compression was a brutal, physical fact in a room built on illusion.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The rhythmic count was a metronome resetting the room's broken rhythm. This was no longer a social event. It was a medical emergency. The illusion of control was gone. Mr. Kong, the chairman's head of security, finally broke through the ring of spectators. He was a broad, stoic man whose entire career was built on preventing this exact moment. His eyes took in the scene, his boss on the floor, the hated nurse performing CPR, and his boss's wife radiating a murderous stillness. "Madam," he began, his voice a low rumble, directed at Minjun. But it was Chloe who answered, never breaking her rhythm. "Call an ambulance. Now," she ordered, her voice sharp with command. "Tell them it's a witnessed cardiac arrest, non-responsive. Possible poisoning." The word hung in the air, heavy and lethal.
Poisoning.
It shifted the narrative from tragedy to conspiracy. Mr. Kang's eyes narrowed. He looked at Chloe, then at the chairman's ashen face, and then at the furious, helpless expression on Minjun. He made a choice. He pulled out his phone, turning away from his employer's wife to follow the orders of the young woman in the purple dress. In that moment, the hierarchy of the entire organization had been redrawn around a dying man's body. The outsider was now in control. Minjun's face hardened into a mask of perfect, cold fury. She had been publicly and professionally overridden, and she would not forget it. The arrival of the paramedics shattered the ballroom's cathedral-like hush with the profane intrusion of real-world urgency. They moved with a practiced, unceremonious haste, their gear and their grim professionalism a foreign language in this place of cultivated ease. The crowd finally parted, creating a wide circle around the scene, their shock morphing into a morbid, hungry curiosity. Chloe did not relinquish her position until the lead paramedic was at her side. She continued compressions, her rhythm unbroken, as she delivered a clinical, concise report. Male, approximately 60 years old. Witnessed collapse, no preceding symptoms reported. Non-responsive, apneic, pulseless on my arrival. CPR initiated within 30 seconds. Suspect ingestion of an unknown toxin. Note the circumoral cyanosis and a faint, bitter almond scent. Her words were precise. Forensic. She was not a panicked guest. She was a medical professional, and her competence was a shield. The paramedic nodded, his expression serious, as his team took over, attaching defibrillator pads and preparing in 4-line. Minjun pushed forward, attempting to reclaim her role as the concerned wife, the center of the tragedy. "I am his wife," she announced, her voice trembling with what could have been mistaken for grief, but which Chloe recognized as pure, unadulterated rage. "I will ride with him." The lead paramedic glanced at her, his expression neutral. "Family can follow behind, ma'am. We need the space to work," but Chloe was already moving toward the gurney. "I'm his nurse. I have his medical history. I need to be there." It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. She was his former nurse, but in this moment, that distinction was a luxury no one could afford. Before Minjun could protest, before the paramedic could object, Mr. Kong stepped forward, placing a firm, restraining hand on Minjun's arm. "She goes," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He looked at the paramedic. "She goes." The doors of the ambulance closed, sealing Chloe inside with the man whose life was hanging by a thread, and sealing Minjun outside, her authority completely, devastatingly, stripped away. Inside the rocking, siren-screaming confines of a vehicle, the chaos was a controlled storm of medical intervention. Through it all, Chloe's eyes never left Chairman Han. She watched the monitors, she watched the medics, and she watched his face, committing every detail to memory. The slight discoloration on his fingernail beds. The way his skin felt cool and clammy to the touch. These were not just symptoms. They were clues in a crime she was already beginning to solve. At the hospital, the emergency bay doors burst open, and the sterile, white world of the hospital consumed them. Chloe delivered her handover to the waiting trauma team, a seamless transfer of information. She was a bridge between two worlds, the opulent ballroom where the attack began, and the clinical theater where the battle for his life would be fought. And then Minjun arrived, flanked by 2 more of Han's men, her face a pale, determined mask. The fight was far from over. The hospital waiting room was a sterile, impersonal purgatory, its beige walls and worn-out chairs a brutalist contrast to the gilded cage they had just left. It was a great equalizer, a place where power and influence were forced to submit to the agonizingly slow pace of medical procedure. But Han Minjun was not a woman who accepted equalization. As soon as the trauma room doors swung shut, she turned on Chloe, her voice a venomous whisper. "You," she hissed, the single word dripping with a year of accumulated resentment. I knew you were a plague the moment he brought you into our home. I told him to get rid of you. Mr. Kong stood a few feet away, his back to them, affording them a semblance of privacy while clearly listening to every word. Chloe met Minjun's gaze without flinching. Her adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, clear-eyed exhaustion. I was his nurse, Minjun. I was doing my job. Your job was to check his blood pressure and leave. Minjun shot back, her voice rising slightly. Not to become his confidant. Not to earn his trust. He never trusted anyone. Not me, not his own sons. But he trusted you. A 23-year-old girl who appeared from nowhere. The story began to unspool in the narration, a hidden history that recontextualized the entire night. Chairman Han had suffered a minor heart attack a year prior, a warning shot from his own body. His doctors had insisted on round-the-clock home care during his recovery. Chloe, fresh from her residency but with impeccable recommendations, had been hired. She was professional, discreet, and unimpressed by his wealth. She spoke to him not as a titan of industry, but as a patient, a man whose body had betrayed him. For Han Jinwoo, a man suffocated by sycophants and schemers, her blunt honesty was like a window thrown open in a sealed room. He began to talk to her, not about his business, but about his life, his regrets. He found in her a quiet, non-judgmental intelligence that he had never found in his own family. When her contract ended, he kept her on ostensibly as a health consultant, but in reality, she was the closest thing he had to a friend. He had invited her to the gala tonight, not as staff, but as a guest. It was a gesture of profound respect, a public acknowledgement of her place in his life. For Minjun, it was the final, unforgivable insult. It was a public declaration that this young, foreign woman had succeeded where she had failed. She had breached the fortress of his solitude. To Minjun, Chloe wasn't a nurse. She was a rival, a usurper who had stolen the one thing she could never fully possess, her husband's trust. A doctor finally emerged from the double doors, his face etched with a professional gravity that offered no comfort. He was a man in his 50s, his scrubs slightly rumpled, a gatekeeper to the world of life and death. He addressed Minjun, but his eyes kept flicking to Chloe, recognizing the authority she had projected earlier.
MS. Han.
Your husband is stable for now. We were able to restart his heart, but he's in a medically induced coma to protect his brain function. He's been moved to the cardiac ICU. Minjun's hand went to her throat, a perfect gesture of wifely distress. What happened? Was it his heart? The doctor hesitated, a small, almost imperceptible pause that Chloe registered instantly. His heart did stop. Yes. But we believe it was a secondary event. His initial toxicology screen came back with anomalies. We found a substance in his blood, a sophisticated beta-blocker derivative combined with a fast-acting potassium channel agonist. It's not something you see outside of a research lab. It's designed to induce cardiac arrest and be nearly untraceable after a few hours. The word poison was not used, but it hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Minjun swayed slightly, and Mr. Kong moved to study her, his face an unreadable mask of stone. His focus, however, was now entirely on the new reality. This was no longer just a medical crisis. It was an assassination attempt. He pulled out his phone again, his movements economical and precise. He was no longer just a bodyguard. He was an investigator. The first call was to lock down the ballroom. Nobody in or out. Secure the kitchens, the bar, everything. I want the guest list, seating charts, and all security footage from the last 12 hours. His voice was low, clipped, a chain of commands that signaled a fundamental shift in operations. The organization was now at war. He hung up and turned his gaze to Chloe. His eyes, which had previously held a neutral watchfulness, now carried a new intensity. He was looking at her not as a nurse, or as a source of conflict with his boss's wife, but as the single most important witness they had. You, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Tell me everything you saw.
From the moment you arrived.
Every person he spoke to. Everything he ate. Everything he drank. Do not leave out a single detail. Chloe took a deep breath, her mind already replaying the evening in forensic detail. She saw the procession of business partners, the polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the endless glasses of champagne. And then one image sharpened into focus. A toast. A quiet moment with a man Han had called his oldest rival and his most dangerous friend.
Director Choi.
She remembered the way Choi had handed Han a specific glass, his own smile a little too wide, a little too bright. She remembered the barest flicker of hesitation in Han's eyes before he drank. It was nothing. It was everything. The intensive care unit was another world, a hushed, sterile environment governed by the rhythmic sigh of ventilators and the steady beep of monitors. Chairman Han lay in the center of a web of tubes and wires, his formidable presence reduced to a fragile, biological machine. For Mr. Kong, this place, with its constant flow of hospital staff and its procedural transparency, was a security nightmare. Every nurse, every doctor, every cleaner was a potential threat. He stood by the window, looking down at the city lights, his mind racing. "He's too exposed here," he said, not to anyone in particular. "This is the best cardiac unit in the country," Minjun countered, her voice sharp. She wanted the legitimacy, the prestige of a world-renowned hospital. It was a symbol of their status. "Status won't protect him from a second attempt," Kong replied, his tone flat and final. "We're moving him," he had already made the arrangements. A private medical transport was on its way. They were going to a discreet, high-end clinic, one owned by a subsidiary of Han's corporation. It was less a hospital and more a fortress, equipped with a state-of-the-art medical wing and staffed by doctors and nurses who were already on the company payroll. They were loyal. They were silent.
Minjun's face tightened.
"You cannot make that decision without my authority." Kong turned from the window to face her directly. His customary deference was gone, stripped away by the raw urgency of the situation. "Madam Han, my only authority is the chairman. My only priority is his life. He is incapacitated. Until he wakes, I am responsible for his security. We are leaving in 20 minutes. It was a quiet, brutal coup. He had just declared himself acting regent, the guardian of the throne, and there was nothing she could do about it. Then, he turned his gaze to Chloe. The young nurse had been standing silently by the door, an observer to the power struggle. "We need you," Kong stated.
It was not a request.
"You will be his primary caregiver. You are the only one I trust to be in that room with him." Minjun's gasp was sharp, a sound of pure outrage. "Absolutely not. I will not have that woman near my husband. I am his wife. I will care for him." Kang's expression remained unchanged. "You are his wife, yes. But she is the reason he is still alive. She saw the signs of poison when no one else did." The chairman valued her judgment. He trusted her. In his absence, "I will do the same." The logic was cold, unassailable, and it left Minjun utterly defeated. She stared at Chloe, her eyes burning with a hatred that was now mixed with the bitter taste of powerlessness. Chloe felt the weight of their combined stares. She was being pulled into the very center of a world she had only ever observed from the periphery. She could refuse. She could walk away, back to her normal life. But when she looked at the unconscious man in the bed, she felt a pull of loyalty, of professional duty, that she couldn't ignore. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "But I have conditions. I want his complete, unredacted medical history, including the files from his first heart attack. And I want a copy of the full toxicology report from the lab the second it's available. I need all the information if I'm going to keep him alive." Kong nodded once. Done, the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The outsider was now the gatekeeper. The private clinic was less like a hospital and more like a five-star hotel designed by a paranoid architect. The walls were reinforced, the glass was ballistic, and the air was filtered. It was a gilded cage, a silent, sterile sanctuary where Chairman Han could be kept alive. Chloe found herself in a spacious suite, where Han's hospital bed looked strangely out of place amidst the polished mahogany and muted earth tones. Her world had shrunk to this single room, to the rhythmic beeping of the machines that were now the soundtrack of her life. Minjun was a ghost in this new reality. She was permitted to visit for 1 hour each day, always under the watchful eye of Mr. Kong, or one of his men. She would sit in a chair by the window, a silent, crimson-clad sentinel of resentment, her presence a constant, low-grade pressure in the room. She never spoke to Chloe, and Chloe never spoke to her. They were two women orbiting a silent sun, locked in a cold war of proximity. The days bled into one another. Chloe established a routine, a meticulous regimen of care. She monitored his vitals, administered his medications, and performed the subtle, intimate tasks of nursing, turning his body to prevent sores, moistening his lips, keeping him clean. In the long, quiet hours of the night, when the rest of the world was asleep, she would read to him. She read from novels, from books of poetry, from the financial news she knew he would want to hear. She spoke to him as if he could hear her, updating him on his own condition, telling him he was safe. It was a one-sided conversation, a vigil of quiet, professional intimacy. It was during the third day that Mr. Kong brought in the last of the chairman's personal effects from the office, his briefcase, his favorite pen, a stack of files he had been reviewing. Kong had already swept them for bugs or tracking devices. "I thought you might want to have something of his in a room," he said gruffly, a rare gesture of something approaching warmth. That evening, while organizing the items on a nearby table, Chloe noticed something odd about the briefcase. It was a custom piece, leather-bound and heavy. As she wiped it down, her finger caught on a small, almost invisible seam in the lining. Curious, she pressed it. A hidden compartment, no bigger than a paperback book, clicked open. Inside, there was no money, no secret weapon. There was only a single, slim file folder. Chloe's heart began to beat a little faster. She pulled it out. The label on the tab was stark and simple, HMJ Han Min-jun. She opened it. It was not a love letter or a legal document. It was a full-scale private investigation file. There were bank statements showing massive, unexplained wire transfers to an offshore account. There were phone records detailing dozens of calls to a single, unlisted number. And there were photographs. Grainy, long-lens surveillance photos of Min-jun, meeting secretly in quiet cafes and shadowy parking garages. The man she was meeting with was unmistakable. It was Director Choi, the man who had handed her husband the poison glass. The file felt heavy in Chloe's hands, its contents radiating a cold, sickening energy. This was the secret architecture of the entire tragedy. Min-jun's hatred wasn't born of simple jealousy. It was the desperate fear of a conspirator whose cover was about to be blown. Chloe had never been just a nurse to her. She was a witness, an unforeseen variable in a deadly equation. Chairman Han had known. He had been investigating his own wife. The gala, the public toast with his rival, it was all cast in a new, sinister light. Was he walking into a trap, or was he setting one of his own? Chloe's mind raced through the possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. Her first instinct was to go to Mr. Kong. He was the loyal subordinate, the enforcer of Han's will. But the file raised a terrifying question. How deep did this conspiracy go? Kong was fiercely loyal to the chairman, but he was also traditional. The shame of a wife's betrayal, the potential destruction of the family's public image. Would he bury the truth to protect the institution? She couldn't take that risk. Not yet. She was alone in this, armed with a truth that could get her killed. She needed to control the narrative. She needed to force Min-jun's hand. A plan began to form, a dangerous, calculated gamble. The next morning, during a routine check-in call with Mr. Kong, she deliberately let a piece of false information slip. "His neurological signs are improving," she said, her voice laced with cautious optimism. "He responded to a pressure test on his hand this morning. The doctors think he might be starting to surface from the coma. It was a complete fabrication, but she knew Kong would immediately relay the information. The news would travel. It would reach Min-jun. And a woman who had conspired to murder her husband would not be able to risk him waking up and telling his story." That night, Chloe made her preparations. She spoke with the clinic's head of security, a man personally vetted by Kong, and arranged for the camera in Han's room, usually turned off for patient privacy, to be activated and fed directly to a monitor in an adjacent security office. She told him she was worried about an external threat. She did not mention the wife. At 2:17 a.m., the silent alarm she had set on the room's door chimed on her phone. She was in the security office with Mr. Kong, whom she had summoned under the pretext of an urgent medical update. On the screen, a shadowy figure slipped into the room. It was Minjun. She was dressed in black, her usual regal posture replaced by a furtive, nervous energy. She moved to the bedside, her face a complicated mask of what looked like grief and fear. She whispered his name, a sound full of sorrow. Then, her eyes darted to the foredrip, to the clear bag of saline and the medication port. Her hand, trembling slightly, reached for it. In her other hand, hidden in her palm, was a syringe. Mr. Kong let out a breath, a sharp, ragged sound of disbelief and betrayal. Just as her fingers were about to touch the foreline, Chloe leaned into the microphone connected to the room's intercom. Her voice, cold and clear, filled the silent room. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Minjun." Minjun froze, her hand hovering over the foreport, the syringe a glint of metal in the dim light from the medical monitors. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with the terror of a cornered animal. The door to the suite swung open, and Mr. Kong stepped inside, his face a granite mask of cold fury. Chloe followed a step behind him, her arms crossed, her expression one of grim finality. The room was suddenly very small, charged with the suffocating weight of discovery. Minjun's composure, the elegant artifice she had maintained her entire life, finally shattered. She crumpled, not physically, but internally. Her shoulders slumped, and a dry, desperate sob escaped her lips. "It wasn't supposed to kill him," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a frantic, broken rush. "Choi promised me. He said it was just enough to make him sick, to put him in the hospital for a few weeks. Just long enough for the board to lose confidence, for Choi to push through the merger." The confession hung in the air, a story of betrayal far more pathetic and complex than simple greed. "He was blackmailing me," she continued, her eyes pleading with calm, searching for an ounce of the loyalty he had once shown her. "Before I met Jinwoo, my family, my father, made a terrible mistake. He took money from the wrong people. Choi's father. It was a debt of honor, a stain on our name. Choi inherited that debt. He held it over me for years. He said if I didn't help him, he would ruin us, reveal the secret to Jinwoo, and destroy everything I had built." She was both a villain and a victim, an elegant insider trapped by a past she could not escape. Her desperate attempts to get rid of Chloe were now perfectly clear. She feared the nurse's sharp eyes, her proximity to Han, her potential to uncover the truth not just of the poison, but of the secrets Minjun was hiding. Mr. Kong stood in silence, his face unreadable. He was a man of order, of loyalty to a strict code. This revelation had broken that code into 1,000 pieces. To expose Minjun would be to publicly humiliate the chairman, to admit that the heart of his empire, his own family, was rotten. It would create a power vacuum that could tear the entire organization apart. To protect her would be to betray the man he had sworn his life to. For the first time, he looked lost. Chloe stepped forward, her voice cutting through his indecision. "She's telling you her motive." "She isn't telling you she's sorry," Chloe said, her gaze fixed on Minjun. "She came here tonight to finish the job. Blackmail or not, that was her choice." She then turned to Kong. "What she did doesn't matter as much as what Choi is still doing.
He's still out there.
He thinks his plan is working. He thinks the chairman is dying, and he's making his move. Protecting her means letting him win." The moral calculus was brutal and clear. There were no good options, only choices between different kinds of ruin. They were trapped in a triangle of betrayal, loyalty, and survival, and the man at the center of it all lay silent and still, unaware of the war being waged over his legacy. As the weight of their impossible decisions settled over the room, a new sound emerged, cutting through the tension. It was a subtle change in the rhythm of the heart monitor, a slight quickening in the steady, metronomic beep. All three of them turned toward the bed. Chairman Han's eyelids were fluttering. A low groan escaped his lips, the first sound he had made in days. His eyes, clouded at first, slowly began to focus. They moved deliberately, taking in the scene before him. He saw his wife, her face streaked with tears of terror and guilt. He saw Mr. Kong, his loyal soldier, his face a portrait of conflicted agony. And finally, his gaze settled on Chloe. He looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes, there was not surprise, but a flicker of something else. Recognition. Confirmation. He had been aware, on some level. He had been listening. His lips parted, and he tried to speak. The first attempt was a dry, rasping whisper. He swallowed, gathering what little strength he had. "Kong," he breathed, his voice barely audible. Mr. Kong rushed to his side.
"Sir."
"I am here." Chairman Han's eyes did not leave Chloe. "Protect the nurse," he managed to say, each word an effort. "She is the key." Minjun let out a choked sound, a final, devastating blow to her world. Even from the edge of death, his first thought was for the other woman. But before anyone could process the command, another sound interrupted them. A firm, authoritative knock on the door of the suite. Mr. Kong stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the weapon he carried beneath his jacket. Chloe moved to block the line of sight to the bed. The knocking came again, louder this time. "Open the door," Kong ordered one of his men stationed outside via his earpiece. The door swung open, but it was not a doctor or a clinic staff member. It was a group of 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, dressed in dark, conservative business suits that screamed federal government. The man in the lead held up a badge. "Daniel Park, Federal Prosecutor's Office. We have a warrant to secure this room and to speak with Chairman Han Jinwoo." Mr. Kong was stunned into silence. Minjun's face went white with a new, more profound terror. This was a threat beyond corporate espionage, beyond family betrayal. This was the full weight of the law. The lead prosecutor, Park, ignored them all and walked directly to the bedside. He looked down at the newly conscious chairman. And then the most impossible thing happened. Han Jinwoo, a man who had been at death's door moments before, met the prosecutor's gaze and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. A silent communication passed between them. In that instant, Chloe understood. The collapse in the ballroom wasn't an assassination attempt that Han had stumbled into. It was an event he had anticipated. The poison, the coma, the entire near-death experience, it was all part of a scorched earth strategy he had designed himself, a way to draw out all his enemies at once, from his rivals to his own wife. He hadn't just been a victim. He had been a player in his own elaborate, high-stakes game. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. And Chloe, the outsider nurse who had only wanted to do her job, was now standing at the absolute center of it all.